In an interview with Fareed Zakaria, Bill Gates openly praised the recent US-China tariff truce, declaring it a landmark for economic stability and mutual progress. He didn't expect a lightning bolt from Capitol Hill. That lightning came in the form of Representative Jasmine Crockett, who didn't just question his remarks, she obliterated them in a fiery takedown that left America stunned. Crockett called out not just Gates's words, but the entire mindset behind them, forcing a national reckoning on trade, privilege, and the forgotten working class. When Bill Gates appeared at a global economic summit last week and confidently praised the recent US-China tariff truce as a positive step forward, he likely thought he was offering a balanced, forward-thinking view of global economics. After all, Gates has built his brand on calm rationality, global philanthropy, and technological optimism, but the reality he seemed to ignore, and the reality Representative Jasmine Crockett had no intention of allowing to go unnoticed, is that these so-called positive steps often come at the expense of millions of Americans whose lives have been decimated by decades of neoliberal trade policy. Crockett didn't wait for the news cycle to pass. She took a stand and made it loud, clear, and impossible to ignore. Crockett's takedown of Gates's remarks began with a scathing commentary on the history of US-China trade relations and the devastating effects these policies have had on American workers. In a powerful floor speech that quickly went viral, she reminded the American people that behind every diplomatic handshake and tariff truce, there are rusted-out factories, lost jobs, and struggling families. She didn't mince words. It's easy, she said, for a billionaire who's never had to worry about a paycheck to celebrate a truce, but for the American people, especially the working class, this isn't a celebration, it's a continuation of exploitation dressed up as progress. Her words struck a chord with millions of Americans who have long felt abandoned by both political parties when it comes to trade policy. Crockett spoke directly to that pain, invoking stories of communities gutted by outsourcing, of small towns that once thrived on manufacturing now turned into ghost towns. She painted a vivid picture of what economic dislocation really looks like: the factory worker forced into early retirement, the mom juggling 3 jobs to make up for a lost household income, the college graduate returning home only to find no job prospects in a town that has been economically abandoned. These weren't just anecdotes. They were indictments of a system that rewards the wealthy for playing chess with international trade, while the pawns, ordinary people, get sacrificed. But Crockett didn't stop there. She turned her focus squarely on Gates, not to launch a personal attack, but to call out the inherent disconnect between billionaire optimism and everyday reality. She questioned how someone who has benefited enormously from globalization, a man whose companies have outsourced labor, benefited from lax international regulations, and profited in global markets, could genuinely claim to see a tariff truce as a win for all. She demanded to know where Gates was when American steel towns collapsed, where his voice was when cheap imports drove local industries into bankruptcy. "Your silence then," she said with piercing conviction, "makes your applause now sound hollow." What made Crockett's critique so devastating was her ability to pull back the curtain on the cozy relationship between corporate interests and political diplomacy. She didn't just accuse Gates of being out of touch, she laid out how the entire narrative around the US-China trade war had been manipulated to serve elites, while everyday Americans were told to be patriotic, tighten their belts, and endure economic hardship for the sake of the nation. Multinational corporations were quietly moving production overseas, cutting costs, and boosting profits. Crockett asked the one question few in power dare to raise: who really wins when the tariffs come down? Her answer was sharp and chilling: not us. She went further, highlighting the vast inequality in how trade benefits are distributed. Gates might have seen market stability in the truce, but Crockett saw something different: another chance for the rich to get richer, while the poor keep getting crumbs. She dissected the talking points often used by global elites, dismantling the myth that free trade always benefits everyone. She pointed to data, studies, and real-life examples that showed how trade deals often widen the wealth gap, displace jobs, and erode worker protections. "Let's stop pretending," she said, "that lifting up China's tech sector is somehow lifting up the American people." The blowback against Gates was immediate, and not just from Crockett. Her remarks lit up social media, where working-class Americans from both sides of the political spectrum praised her courage. In union halls, coffee shops, and factory floors across the country, people were sharing clips of Crockett's speech and saying what many had long felt, that the elite narrative no longer speaks for them. Gates, normally seen as above the fray of political warfare, suddenly found himself in the middle of a populist storm, with Crockett standing firmly at its center. Even more startling was how Gates responded. In a follow-up interview days later, Gates tried to clarify his remarks, saying he was merely encouraging cooperation and mutual economic benefit, but the damage was already done. Crockett's rebuttal had struck too deep, had resonated too widely. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the role billionaires play in shaping national policy without ever being held accountable. It was about how their vision of progress often leaves the rest of America behind, and no amount of backpedaling could undo that. As the story grew, Crockett continued her crusade, making appearances on major news networks, where she doubled down on her message. She reminded viewers that she wasn't against diplomacy or peace, but she was against economic gaslighting. She pushed back on the idea that criticizing billionaires like Gates meant being anti-innovation or anti-progress. Instead, she made it clear that real progress means making sure that innovation doesn't come at the expense of human dignity, that technological advancement isn't used as a shield for corporate greed. One particularly powerful moment came when Crockett held up a chart showing the timeline of U.S. trade agreements and the corresponding decline in American manufacturing jobs. This, she declared, pointing at the downward slope, is what progress looks like for the working poor. The audience was silent, many visibly uncomfortable, but Crockett wasn't interested in making anyone comfortable. She was interested in telling the truth. What made Crockett's humiliation of Gates so effective wasn't just her fiery rhetoric or her fearless delivery, it was her moral clarity. In an age where politicians often hedge, pivot, and compromise, Crockett stood firm. She refused to let elite narratives dominate the conversation, and she refused to let the plight of ordinary Americans be forgotten in the rush to praise international agreements that do little for them. Her voice became a clarion call for economic justice, and in doing so, she elevated herself as a force to be reckoned with in national politics. As the political world grappled with the fallout, some tried to paint Crockett's comments as divisive or unfair, but those criticisms fell flat, especially as more Americans came forward to echo her concerns. The conversation had shifted. No longer was the tariff truce being hailed as a universal good. Now, thanks to Crockett, it was being examined with the scrutiny it deserved. The media began digging deeper into the deal's implications, uncovering clauses that favored large corporations, pointing out loopholes that would allow companies to continue offshoring jobs, and questioning whether any real accountability existed. What began as a seemingly minor comment from Gates had turned into a national debate about the soul of American economic policy, and it was Crockett who lit the fuse. Her words not only humbled one of the world's richest men, but they forced an entire country to look inward. Are we truly building an economy that serves all Americans? Or are we simply clapping along as the privileged make decisions behind closed doors? Crockett didn't just humiliate Gates, she exposed the fragility of a system built on elite assumptions. Her stand reminded Americans that democracy demands vigilance, that patriotism isn't measured by loyalty to deals, but by loyalty to people, and most importantly, she reminded the political class that when the people rise up with one voice, even the richest man in the room can be called to account. This story, however, isn't just about one moment or one speech. It's about a movement demanding that economic justice be more than a slogan, that trade deals be measured by how they impact Main Street, not just Wall Street. It's about a politician like Jasmine Crockett refusing to bow to power, and instead, using her platform to speak truth to it. In doing so, she's not just confronting billionaires, she's reclaiming a national conversation that too often forgets who it's really supposed to serve. And as Americans everywhere replay that moment, the fire in her voice, the undeniable facts, the moral authority behind her words, they know they witnessed something rare, a leader who didn't just speak for the people but spoke as one of them. Crockett's stand will be remembered not just for what she said, but for what it sparked. A call to wake up, a call to question, a call to demand better. If you found Jasmine Crockett's bold stand against economic hypocrisy inspiring, and if you believe more voices like hers need to be amplified, then make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment of truth, justice, and accountability. Let's keep this conversation going and ensure that power always answers to the people.